There is a small, leather-bound book in a vault in Sleepy Hollow, New York. The spine is cracked. The pages are foxed at the corners. On the cover, in a boy's careful hand, 2 letters, Ledger A. The first entry is dated September of 1855. A 16-year-old assistant bookkeeper in Cleveland has written down what he earned that week, what he tithed to his church, what he gave to a black man in Cincinnati to help buy his wife out of slavery, and what he spent on a pencil. He will keep books like this one for the next 70 years. Inside their pages, he will record every transaction of his life, every dollar earned, every dollar given away, every dollar reinvested. By the time he closes the final ledger, he will own 90% of the oil refined in the United States, and his fortune, adjusted, will exceed that of any human being who has ever lived. His name is John Davison Rockefeller, and the most interesting fact about him is not the wealth.
It is that his father was a confidence man who sold cancer cures from the back of a wagon and disappeared for years at a time under a name that was not his own. This is a story about inversion, about a son who watched his father lie for a living and decided, very deliberately, very young, to build a life out of the opposite material. Where the father improvised, the son recorded. Where the father vanished, the son audited. Where the father took small sums from many strangers and ran, the son took small margins from many barrels and stayed. The ledger was not a habit, it was a refusal. To understand the richest man in history, you have to begin with the man he was running from, and then with the book he kept to prove he was not him. The ledger does not open with poetry. It opens with arithmetic. September 26, 1855. Income from work as assistant bookkeeper, Hewitt & Tuttle, 50 cents per day. Total for the week, $3.50. Tithe to the Erie Street Baptist Mission Church, 35 cents. To the Sunday School, 10 cents. To a man named Charles, that he might purchase his wife, 5 cents. Pencil, 3 cents. The boy is 16. He has walked from boarding house to office every morning for 6 weeks before they paid him anything. He keeps the book because his mother told him to keep it, but he also keeps it because he has seen what happens to a household that does not. He has seen his father return from a journey of 11 months with a wallet full of bills and no explanation of where the bills came from. He has seen his mother go to the grocer with a list of items she cannot pay for. He has watched her tear off small pieces of paper and write on them in a hand that did not tremble. Ode, ode, ode. He is determined that the small pieces of paper in his own life will say something else. Listen to the entries from the following year. They are not the entries of a child.
They are the entries of an actuary in a child's body. January 1856. Loaned to father $50 at 10%. He has loaned his own father money at interest. The father has signed for it. The father, who never repaid debts to anyone, who would borrow from his sons and call it allowance, has put his name on a piece of paper that holds him accountable to a teenage boy. There is no record of whether William Avery Rockefeller ever paid the note. There is a record of the boy entering the amount. April 1859. Withdrew from Hewitt & Tuttle. Established partnership Clark and Rockefeller. Produce commission merchants. Capital contributed $1,000, of which $900 was a loan from father at 10%. The con man's son has, by the age of 19, weaponized his father's own pattern of opportunistic lending and turned it into the seed capital of an empire. He has not stolen the money. He has documented it. The loan exists on the page.
The interest accrues on the page. The repayment in 1865 also exists on the page. Every figure is in his own hand. When biographers were finally given access to these books, a century later, the historian Alan Nevins set down his glasses and said, in a small voice, that he had never seen anything like them in his life. They were not the books of a businessman. They were the books of a man building a fortress out of paper. To understand the fortress, you have to picture the man it was built against. It is the spring of 1849. The Rockefeller farmhouse stands on a stony rise in Richford, New York, a hamlet so remote that the road in disappears under mud for half the year. The house has one good room. In that room, Eliza Rockefeller, the mother, is grinding corn by hand because the mill is too far to walk to with 3 small children. The oldest of the 3 is John Davison. He is 10 years old. He is sitting in the corner with a piece of slate, and he is doing sums. Outside, the rumor has reached the village again. A man matching the description of William Avery Rockefeller has been seen in a town 2 counties over. He is calling himself Dr. William Livingston. He is wearing a long coat and a tall hat. He is offering, for $3 in cash or $6 on credit, a bottle of tonic that he claims will cure cancer of any organ. He is, the rumor says, very persuasive. He has a beard the color of a fox and a voice that carries. He laughs often. Women trust him. Men buy from him because the women have. He has been gone, this time, for 9 months. He will come home eventually. He always comes home eventually. He will arrive on a fast horse with a roll of banknotes and a story. He will throw silver dollars to the children in the dooryard and laugh while they scramble. He will teach his sons, as he has taught them before, that the world is divided into the sharp and the simple, and that a Rockefeller is sharp. He will say, in a sentence the son will quote with stone-faced precision 60 years later, "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make 'em sharp." The boy in the corner with the slate hears this. He files it. He does not weep. He does not argue. He returns to the sum he was working on, and he completes it. Decades later, when an interviewer asks the richest man in the world what he learned from his father, John D. Rockefeller will pause for what the interviewer describes as an uncomfortable length of time. He will then say, "I learned the value of being thorough." He will not elaborate. Everything else, the trust, the rebates, the Cleveland massacre, the South Improvement Company, the consolidation of an entire industry under one man's hand, everything else flows from that uncomfortable pause. In 1863, Rockefeller and his partner Maurice Clark put up $4,000 to build a small refinery on the banks of Kingsbury Run in Cleveland. The Civil War was on. Petroleum, drawn 3 years earlier from the first commercial well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, was beginning to replace whale oil in the lamps of the country. The trade was chaotic. Refineries opened and closed within months. Prices swung by half in a week. Most of the men who entered the business were gamblers, flush one year, broken the next, drinking themselves into ruin by 30. Rockefeller did not drink. He did not gamble. He did not speculate. He arrived at the refinery at 6:30 each morning, in a dark suit and a stiff collar, and he asked questions. How much does a barrel cost to make? How much does the cooper charge for the staves? How much for the iron hoops? Could we make our own staves? Could we make our own hoops? Could we own the forest the staves came from? Could
Could we own the foundry where the hoops were forged? In 1865, he bought out Clark for $72,000 at auction, in a moment Clark later described as the worst hour of his life.
By 1870, he had incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio. By 1872, in a single 40-day operation that history would call the Cleveland Massacre, he had absorbed 22 of the 26 refineries in the city. Some sold willingly. Some sold under the pressure of railroad rebates he had quietly negotiated, and they had not. Some sold for cash. Some sold for shares in the new entity, shares that would compound over the next 40 years into wealth their original owners could not have imagined, and many of them would never live to see. By 1882, the Standard Oil Trust held 90% of the refining capacity of the United States, controlled the pipelines that moved the crude, owned the cooperage that made the barrels, owned the warehouses that held the product, and was negotiating directly with the railroads on rates the railroads would not have given anyone else. Rockefeller was 43 years old. He had built the largest private organization the world had ever seen, and he had done it without, by his own account, ever once acting on impulse. Each step is in the ledger. Each step has a date. Each step has a sum. The man who could not predict his own father had built a structure in which nothing was unpredictable except the men outside it. So what, exactly, did he do that his father did not? There are 4 components. They are not mysterious. They are not proprietary. They are, in fact, almost embarrassingly available. But they require something most men will not pay, which is the willingness to be boring on purpose, for a very long time, in pursuit of an outcome no one else can see yet. First, he wrote everything down, not as bookkeeping, as cognition. The act of recording every transaction, however small, forced him to know, at any moment, on any day, the exact state of every piece of his enterprise. His father lived in a fog of half-remembered debts and half-believed lies. The son lived inside a system in which the fog was not permitted to exist. The ledger was not a record of his decisions. The ledger was the surface on which decisions became possible. Second, he owned the adjacencies. The con man takes the customer's money and runs. The industrialist takes the customer's money and uses it to buy the supplier, then the supplier's supplier, then the road the supplier's wagon travels on. By 1880, Standard Oil did not buy barrels. It owned the forest the wood came from, the mill that cut it, the cooper that bent it, the wagon that hauled it, the warehouse that stored it, and the railroad spur that brought it in. The margin a competitor paid to outside vendors became, for Standard, internal accounting between subsidiaries. Third, he used time as a weapon. Most of his rivals needed money this quarter. He did not. He had structured his life, small house, no extravagance, no debt to outside parties, so that he could wait. When the oil price collapsed in 1876, he did not sell. He bought. When it collapsed again in the 1880s, he bought. His father, the con man, had needed cash by Friday to leave town on Saturday. The son had built a position in which Friday meant nothing. Fourth, he refused to be visible. The con man courts attention. He is, after all, performing. The industrialist hides. Standard Oil, in its peak years, gave no interviews, published no statements, and answered no questions. When Ida Tarbell finally cracked the organization open in the pages of McClure's, she found that one of the things that had protected it for 30 years was simply that no journalist had ever been able to get a Standard executive on the record long enough to verify anything. The father had been a flame. The son had been the room around the flame, slowly closing. This is, of course, only one way to tell the story. Ida Tarbell, whose father had been a small oil producer in western Pennsylvania and had been broken, economically and in the end personally,
by Standard Oil's tactics in the 1870s, spent 5 years between 1900 and 1904 writing what is still the most damaging single piece of business journalism ever published in the English language. Her version of John D. Rockefeller is not an industrialist, it is a predator. In her account, the ledger is not a moral instrument, it is a hunter's notebook. The thoroughness is not virtue, it is appetite disciplined. The Cleveland Massacre was not, in her telling, a triumph of organization. It was a coordinated act of suffocation against men whose only crime was to have built smaller refineries before he had built his. The railroad rebates were not, in her telling, a clever negotiation. They were a private tax that Standard collected from every competitor whose barrels rode the same trains.
Every dollar that reached Standard's books through that mechanism had been taken from a man who did not know he was paying it. Her father, Franklin Tarbell, had refused to sell out to Standard in 1872. He survived for a few more years on shrinking margins. His partner committed suicide. His business collapsed. He died bitter. When Ida was a child, she had watched her father age, she said later, 20 years in 3. There is a temptation, particularly on a channel that admires the architecture of fortunes, to treat Tarbell as a moralist whose passion clouded her arithmetic. That temptation should be resisted. Her arithmetic was, in fact, devastating. She read the ledgers, she read the contracts, she tracked the rebate schedules, she named names. The Supreme Court read her work, in substance if not by citation, and in 1911 ordered Standard Oil dissolved into 34 pieces. Some of those pieces, under names like Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco, became, individually, among the largest corporations of the 20th century. The whole, in other words, was so large that even its broken fragments would dominate the next 80 years of global industry. The counterview does not erase the discipline, it places it on a scale. Discipline directed at a fortress is a virtue. Discipline directed at a siege is something else. Tarbell's argument, in the end, was not that Rockefeller had been undisciplined. It was that he had been disciplined toward an end that no man should have been permitted to pursue alone. He read her work. He never replied to it in public. In his private correspondence, he referred to her once as that misguided woman. The ledger that day contained no other entry on the subject. The mechanic did not die with him. In Omaha, Nebraska, in a small house that he bought in 1958 for $31,500 and has not moved out of since, a man named Warren Buffett keeps a record of every decision he has made in his investing life. He has written in his annual letters to the shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway that the central discipline of his work is the willingness to do nothing for very long stretches of time. He has called it, more than once, the patience of the unhurried. He has cited John D. Rockefeller by name as the figure who taught the country that compound interest was a moral force. In Seattle, in the 1990s, a former hedge fund analyst named Jeff Bezos began building an online bookstore around a principle he would later articulate as, "Your margin is my opportunity." He meant by this what Rockefeller had meant in 1872. If a competitor is taking a margin from a customer, that margin is an inefficiency, and the operator who removes it will absorb the customer. Amazon, by 2010, did not sell on margins. It sold on volumes that destroyed margins in markets it then owned. The barrel, the Cooper, the wagon, the railroad spur, they reappear as the warehouse, the truck, the data center, the home assistant on the kitchen counter. The structure is identical. The materials have changed. In Cupertino, the late Steve Jobs built a vertically integrated apparatus that Rockefeller would have recognized within an hour. The chip, the operating system, the device, the store, the music on the store, the headphones the music plays through, the cable the headphones plug into. Each adjacency owned, each margin internalized, each competitor forced to interact with Apple through interfaces Apple controlled. None of these men sold snake oil. None of these men disappeared for 9 months under a false name. None of these men needed to.
The con was no longer necessary because the inversion of the con, the patient, recorded, owned, hidden, long compound, had been demonstrated in steel and pipeline and ledger to be the more powerful instrument. The father had been a flame in a dooryard, throwing silver dollars at children for the pleasure of seeing them scramble. The son had built the room. The grandsons in our century have built the building. The great-grandsons, if there are any, will own the city. The ledger is now in a climate-controlled archive. It does not see daylight. Researchers who request access are given white cotton gloves and a pencil, not a pen, because ink, if spilled, could destroy in a moment a record that has survived a century and a half. They turn the pages slowly. They read, in a 16-year-old's careful hand, the entries that record a tithe of 35 cents and a loan to a father at 10%. They read the entries that, in the years that followed, became the largest fortune in the history of the world. There is no famous quotation at the end of the ledger. There is no manifesto. There is no philosophy of wealth pasted to the inside cover. There is only the discipline of having written it all down, and the slow, recorded, patient inversion of a father whose own books, if he ever kept any, were lost to the road. The con man's son did not avenge his father. He did something more interesting than that. He proved, in a hand that did not tremble, that the opposite of a swindle is not honesty. The opposite of a swindle is a record.